Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today is Mother's Day, and I have recently been thinking about, well, the title will tell you, about the archetype of the mother and what that means, and I guess the deeper layers and nuances to that. And part of what inspired this video is Mother's Day itself, but I guess in a sort of synchronistic way. This book that I've been reading here, Conversations with the She by David Spangler, where it's essentially his experiences speaking to a member of the She, and those correspondences. Yeah, correspondences. There's more than one way to use the word correspondence, and I'm so used to using it in terms of like a connection to a card, but to correspond with someone. So yeah, he speaks to this She that he refers to as Marielle, I believe is how you would pronounce her name. And there is a section that I recently read, actually just a day or two ago, about motherhood, where he's teaching a class, so the class gets to ask questions too that he can then bring to her. And they asked about her family. Is she a part of a family unit? Does she have like parents? Does she have children? Is she married? Does she have a partner? How does that work in the world of the She? And I could really get all into this book with how that kind of works. It's sort of this other somewhat corporeal physical space that's not on the same wavelength. They're not quite as physical or dense as us in a physical sense. And so their emotions work differently, time works differently. There's a lot of interesting things going on. So I might reference those for the sake of making what I'm saying easier to understand, because I read this book and like some of the concepts have to do with the book. So yeah, take that how you will. So he asks Marielle about that, like her family, and also about children in general. So her response I found to be really interesting, in that the world of the She is very different. The way that they operate things it's not always so cut and dry. There's not a here or there thing. Something can be two things at once in two places kind of at the same time. Something can change. A lot of what their world is made up of thought forms and their own conscious projections that influence and shape the world around them in a physical sense. And so she says that there are biological parents in the She world, but there's also, it's more than that. So two people come together and create a child biologically, but that there's also soul parents, or in her case, and because she is a woman, she embodies more of that feminine side of the She. They do, I believe, have genders, I could be wrong, or at least sexes, based on what this book speaks on. That's the kind of feeling I get, and she seems to identify with being a woman. So she speaks on being a soul mother. So she says that she isn't a biological mother in the She world, but that she has a soul son and soul daughter. And what that means is that there are the parents that physically create the child, but that they have almost a part in the soul that's going to inhabit the biological physical body. So it's not quite the same as, say, a human, where the soul enters the body and there aren't really members of our world that have part in, say, selecting the soul or bringing it in and nurturing it to be born into that world through that body. But in the world of the She, something to that effect almost occurs, and so there can be multiple soul parents, and she has a soul daughter and a soul son, and so she references them and speaks on that almost being an equally revered and legitimate form of mothering to take place within the realm of the She, and that sometimes children and like soul mothers and soul children are closer than the biological parents and have a stronger connection and role that they play in each other's lives, and that there is a very big aspect of the soul parent raising and taking part in the upbringing of a child. And you also have more of a communal type living, where it's very common for groups to raise children, and there's not so much that nuclear family dynamic. So the idea of mother is very different in that world, and so it got me thinking about that. For example, the idea of a soul mother and how that can influence that idea of mothering, and how I think that for example, we're celebrating Mother's Day, and the primary focus, or where this stems from at least when it started, was really the idea, which to me feels a little bit limited, to celebrate biological mothers. And that's wonderful. I'm really, really thankful for my mother and love celebrating her, so I don't mean to diminish that at all. But I also wanted to speak on the idea of the archetype of the mother, and maybe just, I guess, have a dialogue, or like a think tank with you guys on camera. And I would love to have thoughts and a dialogue in the comments. That's what this is all about. And of course, I as somebody who is a man who doesn't really identify as strongly with the archetype of the mother, I don't mean to speak for anybody or to tell anybody what it is to be a mother and how or if they should have claim to that idea, that role. Far be it from me or anybody else to tell anybody who is or isn't a mother. So yeah, and I just started thinking about different things and different ways that the mothering archetype can be embodied. I thought about, for example, I have my godmother, my father's sister, who doesn't have any biological children, but who's very much a mother to my sister and I. And I consider her basically a part of our immediate family, not even extended family. She's with us all the time. She's constantly doing things with us and for us. She's a very integral part of my upbringing and my sister's, and we jokingly say that she's our second mother, and we celebrate her just as much on Mother's Day, which is really funny. Not funny, but it's interesting to me to think of, like, seeing what and how other people celebrate, say, Mother's Day. And so, to me, in a way, I was like, oh, I guess maybe in reference to this book, thinking of soul mothers or non-biological mothers who have a really big part in, say, a child's life, to me, I was like, oh, that's almost like my soul mother. And so it's just really interesting to think about. It's also interesting that I started to think about what it means to be a mother and the attributes that one would assign, or what sort of amalgamation of traits and feelings create the mother archetype. So yeah, you can be a mother of plants, you can be a mother of your pets, you can be a mother to yourself if you feel like you didn't have an outside influence of that archetype from another human being. You can totally claim the role of mother or the mother archetype for yourself if you feel like you have been the primary one to embody that role for yourself. That's motherhood in a way, just as legitimately as any other form of motherhood, I think, could be. So yeah, and then any sort of role that you might inhabit that feels mothering. There are people that have relationships with, say, an immature partner that in retrospect seem to be more of a mothering type relationship, or you find that you ended up being more of a mother to your partner. So there's so many interesting ways to think about what it means to be a mother, to think about what the mother archetype is and how it manifests in its many and infinite forms, sometimes for good and ill, as I think all archetypes do. I think assigning, say, a title or connotation to an archetype of benevolent versus malevolent is harmful. It's restrictive. So when we think of, say, the trickster or the I'm trying to think of other archetypes. You know what? I believe it's Carolyn Mrs. Archetype deck, and it's right, is it up here? If it is, I want to pull that out, and I think it would be fun for this conversation. Do I have that up here? Oh, I do, okay. All right. Carolyn Mrs. Archetype cards. Let us see. I don't know how this is going to go, but I thought it would be fun to interact with these maybe for the purposes of this video. It feels right, especially when we're talking about connotations of certain archetypes. So we have things like, here's the Mother Archetype card, actually. That's really funny. Okay, this is a really beautiful deck, by the way. It is on Amazon. I'll try to remember to link it. Highly recommend it if this seems like your cup of tea, if you like interacting with archetypes. So we have the Mother. The light attributes nurturance, patience, unconditional love, joy in giving birth to life. And then on the shadow side, we have smothering or abandoning children, instilling guilt in children for becoming independent. And so it's really interesting to think about. This is one person's depiction or idea of what the mother archetype is, like I guess in a dualistic sort of sense. And everybody's is going to be different. Maybe somebody's idea of the mother archetype doesn't even include the word nurturing. It might include more of this structured. It might a structured approach. It might have more to do with overseeing and protecting as opposed to nurturing, with an importance on that. So there's so much that we can think about in terms of the mother archetype and how we view it. I don't think anybody's view of the mother archetype or their own definition is more valid or less valid than another's. And so to look at others' opinions and depictions of the mother archetype, whether it be in art and writing or in practice in the physical world, those are all, I think, so interesting to take note of, to digest into ourselves, so that we can kind of have this big compendium of what it might mean to embody the mother archetype and what the mother archetype is as a universal concept. And so I enjoy it for that aspect, and I've found myself, just because of the fact that it is Mother's Day and because I read that book, and that really kind of spurred my mind to go down a rabbit hole of what it means to be a mother, because of that whole soul mother concept and the way that the she community works in being a little bit more communal. But then there's no hard and fast way to go about it. I would say that for the most part that reigns true for us as humans in a society. There are many different ways to be raised, to be a part of a family or a dynamic that is is part of the upbringing of a child. There are infinite ways to do that. But I would say that we have some stereotypical and common approaches that are more prevalent across various cultures in the world, whereas I think the way that it was described in the book with the she is meant to be that there's no single stereotypical way to raise a child. Every case is unique, even down to the fact that their childhood doesn't have a definitive timeline, that some souls or some she are children for much longer than others, and they remain in that childlike form for much longer than, say, a human would, because their progression through life isn't predicated on biological factors or anatomical factors, how a human body is dense. It's a soul inside of a very physical thing, and that physical thing grows at a certain rate, and that affects the mindset, the soul, the overall experience of the being, whereas a she and their more timeless, to some degree immortal self and body isn't so biologically determined or affected. And so even a child can be a child for a very long time, if not for an eternity almost. And so that's interesting. And the fact that, say, the idea that we connote the motherhood archetype with certain biological factors that can be, I think, harmful and restrictive, and we sometimes even assign things like ages, there's an aspect of ageism in popular ideas of the mother archetype, or ableism even, and those are really interesting to pick apart, to try to understand where they come from, and maybe to hopefully dispel them, because there's so much more, there's so much depth, I think, to the mother archetype that we're almost losing out on if we choose not to interact with it or to try to fully understand it. And another aspect that's, I think, played into my questioning of these topics is my work with the Sheila Na Gig. As I've mentioned, I think, a bunch of times at this point on this channel, she is, in a way, she's a sacred or divine feminine goddess. She very much is tied to those things, especially through her physical depictions. What makes a Sheila Na Gig, as far as a statuette or a sculpture, is a very specific set of features. And so those features are highly intuitively, naturally connected to what it would mean to be I guess like the divine feminine or the sacred feminine. So she's also viewed in some regards as a mother, or she's referred to as a dark mother of sorts, or a dark goddess, in that she presides over things like the miracles of birth and death and rebirth. And so it's more of a metaphorical, figurative type mothering. There actually are Sheilas that are depicted to be physically pregnant, or at least that's what is believed from what the rendering is. But there, a lot of the time, it's more so meant to be figurative. I think that even when we look at tarot and we get an Empress card that's pregnant, it's really meant to be more figurative and metaphorical than it is meant to be a literal depiction of biological motherhood as a prerequisite for what it means to be a mother, or to inhabit that role or that archetype. And so yes, my work with, I think, the Sheila Na gig, and understanding that larger, grander, and well, at least trying to understand that larger, grander scheme of things, and what a figurative and cosmic type mother might be in terms of things like life and death. And I think that motherhood has a lot of ties to the ideas of life, but there's, I don't know, I guess I'm starting to feel like there's so much more to it, and just the fact that, say, the Sheila Na gig is meant to kind of rule over and have jurisdiction over the realms of death just as much as life and rebirth. And I think that major life experiences, by and large, whether it be life itself and the bringing of that, and the ushering in or out of it, all of those can be tied to motherhood. I think that the idea of a progression of a life can, in a way, be tied to motherhood, and that throughout our lives we are constantly encountering and embodying ourselves, the archetype of the mother, to some degree. And I think that some individuals really resonate with and tend toward that archetype, and bring it into themselves. It's a natural fit for them, and so their life may become actual biological motherhood, because maybe that's a strong facet for them. Maybe that's just something that they wanted. Sometimes you fall into it. Maybe, say, someone doesn't really resonate with the motherhood archetype, and really just sporadically embodies it throughout their life. There's so many different options, and I think that it's interesting to see almost what archetypes make up a person at any given time, to dissect who we are today as told by maybe the archetypes we're embodying in any given moment. The archetypes I'm sure that I embody today are not going to be the archetypes that I exemplify and resonate with maybe 10 years from now. And to think that, say, somebody has to be tied to a single archetype, like a single or a definitive long-term eternal archetype, I think is also a bit harmful, to decide that that's what a person is. When, for example, when someone is a mother, especially in previous decades in history, a lot of the time that is that's the role that's assigned to them. They, at least in the US's history, the coming of, throughout history, and how, say, maybe a mother was looked at as a mother, and that's supposed to be their role, and they're supposed to stick to that, and that's their purpose. Like, that's so limiting and harmful, and so counter. That's just not how humans work, I don't think. I don't think that we're ever just one thing, and I think that deciding that we have to be that one thing forever is also really detrimental to our growth and our experience. And there's also sort of a power and bravery in taking on an archetype that we might not have wanted or normally sought out, for the sake of being able to fulfill a role or to do something in life, and that there are lessons to be had there as well. So I hope that this is making sense, and that I'm not just rambling into the void. But I guess I wanted to come on and air out my own mind in terms of the mother archetype, especially on a day that we're celebrating our mothers. I'm celebrating my mother, and no, I'm not ignoring her right now. We had a nice little breakfast and opened presents and cards, and we're gonna have a dinner tonight. So she's having her time now gardening, because that's something she really enjoys doing. And yes, so there's another archetype for her. She is, I don't know exactly what I would call somebody who's a gardener, and I think that people that interact with plants maybe do so for different reasons, and in that way they don't all fit within one archetype either. But yeah, so I hope that was of interest. I definitely recommend Conversations with the She. I'm going to have more to say on this later. I'm definitely going to be mentioning this in a favorites video at the end from May favorites. So it'll be in there. David Spangler's books are really great. I've been enjoying learning about the She in the way that he and I believe it's John Matthews have written about them, and I'm seeking out more literature of that type because I find it really intriguing, and it's raising those sorts of thoughts in me even on ideas of motherhood, when really it's, I wouldn't say that it's not about those things. I would say it's about everything, actually, arguably so, just as many forms of literature can be, depending on how you choose to view them. So, tangent. What a tangent. This whole video was a tangent. So, yeah, if you enjoyed this, if you liked this, like and subscribe. I would really love to know your thoughts on the archetype of the mother, your experiences, all of that stuff, and I hope that this was something that came off with the best intentions and not me trying to pontificate or to be restrictive, or for me to be at all feeling as though I am one who has, I guess, I don't think anybody has more of a right than others to speak on on archetypes of any sort of archetype, but I do know that me being a man speaking about the archetype of a mother is, I guess I probably have less experience to draw from, but I still thought it would be nice, because it's something I'm thinking about, to at least speak about, at least my thoughts anyway, and that's why I would really invite the thoughts and opinions and views of others on this video, so let me know. I hope you're all having a good Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers in any form out there, biological and otherwise. We, as in everybody, I think, value you for what it is that you do and provide, and the role that you play in all the lives that you affect. So much love to all of you. Until next time, bye everyone.